So we're diving back into the Sutras conversation. And in the last session, you were talking about Sutras 1.1 through 1.3, the meaning of all of yoga. And because they assume we don't understand what they're talking about, they go on for an additional 193 sutras to describe what they are talking about in the first 3 sutras. The main one there being Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, right? So we're trying to, really the sutras is the psychology of the mind, right? So in our practice, we kind of move into the body experience, and then with the philosophy, we dive into the mental experience to understand more about who we are. And what are the things that are limiting us or stopping us from reaching that spaciousness or shift in consciousness? And the Kleshas are a perfect example of 5 obstacles to our happiness. Okay. So the Kleshas are avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. So there's 5 Kleshas, just like there's 5 Yamas and 5 Niyamas. So with the Kleshas, it's also known as the wheel of samskara. So samskara is referring to latent impressions or pain bodies that exist through habitual patterns and conditioning, perhaps even past lives, cultural, environmental, societal conditioning, right? So we all have them, and a lot of people refer to these samskaras as really our trauma. Right? And as we move into our practice with the idea of letting go as an essential part of our practice, we're also trying to release the trauma that lives in our cells, that lives in our bodies, right? And we all have it. It just looks different. So in the last conversation, you guys, and in class this morning, we explored these concepts of letting go, a continuous engaged practice, so that we can see more clearly. And those are the terms abhyasa, vairagya, and viveka. Okay? And we'll come back to this because it's an important aspect to getting out of the cycle that we're in, right? And the trauma or the pain bodies, they help us to cycle through different perceptions, sensations, emotions to help protect us and to keep us safe from being traumatized again, basically. And so we are meant to shine light on those areas that give us pain so that we don't have to continue the cycle again. And the only way that we can break the cycle is if at some point we become aware of what it is we need to release, what it is we need to let go of, what lives in our body that doesn't belong anymore. And at some point, we have to pierce the pattern, right? Pierce the cycle, break the cycle. Samskaras are like driving down a muddy road, right? And the truck falls into the same groove that it always does. Right? It's a habitual nature to repeat patterns. And it becomes unconscious after time. We don't even think about, hey, I should probably take this other road because the last 10 times I fell into this groove, this pathway. Right? We become so unconscious of our own cyclical natures. And so yoga is meant to really shine light on that. Because when we increase our awareness, we then know how to break the pattern. So there's good news, and that's that we don't have to continue the cycle, that we can create new neural pathways in the brain, new pathways for the truck to move into a new groove that actually gets us to the other side so that we don't get stuck in the muddy water. Right? So we're trying to move away from negative or destructive ways of being and thinking and adopt new possibilities and positivity. So we're able to, with that awareness, we're able to respond intelligently now rather than being reactionary. And when we can respond intelligently, it also helps to, depending on what you believe, break our karmic cycles as well. So we have to create space in our body and our mind so that we can consciously choose the pathways. So here is how it works. We, from our lens of awareness, we begin to perceive a certain situation from our own perspective that produces a sensation. When we perceive something, it produces a sensation, and from that sensation, what accompanies that is an emotion or a feeling. And based on how we feel is how we respond and react. So we have two choices. We either really like that feeling and we attach onto things like pleasurable experiences, like chocolate cake, right? That feels really good. Chocolate cake feels really good. Or we have an emotion or a feeling from perceiving a situation, having a sensation, and then we do the opposite. We're like, nope, don't like that. Avoid, push down, compartmentalize. However we do that in our lives, we move in here to dvesha, which is avoidance. So in life, generally, we attach on to our pleasures and we detach from our dislikes. That's how it works. I like this, I'm going to do it again. I don't like this, I'm not going to do it again. Right? And that starts to create that groove. So we avoid or attach. Even if we think of, if we like someone and we want to tell them that we like them, but in the past, our experiences are that every time I tell someone that I like them, I feel a sense of rejection. So I'm not going to do that anymore, right? It creates a pattern to avoid that completely. So as a result, I get closed off and I'm not able to express myself in my truth or my reality because I'm scared of that fear of rejection. Well, chocolate cake all day long. Okay, from either our avoidance or attachment, we're basically at that point creating an identity, right? We're creating an identity. I don't like this, so I'm this type of person. I do like this, so I'm this type of person. And that's really where our ego forms, and that's asmita. Right? Our ego identifies with what we like, what we don't like, who we are, and who we are not. Right? Based on our experience, our emotion, our feeling, our sensation, back to our perception. So we all know what happens when the ego gets involved and grows, right? It basically is you think that's who you are, but it's not exactly who you are. It's just formed around your conditioning and your habitual patterning and the way that your thinking has been since the beginning of time. From the ego forming, of course, what we're fearful of most is death. And fear of death doesn't mean the actual decaying of our body, although people are very fearful of that as well. But if we think of death on like a smaller scale, right? We are afraid for our ego to, because that's all we know. Our ego is who we are. So if we start to ask the question of, if I don't have this and I have to die to it, then there's the mystery of the unknown. And that makes people feel uncomfortable. That mystery or that not knowing. Yeah. And so we will hold on to the ego identity for as long as possible. And this can show up in, I was a teacher for 40 years, right? I'm a mother. And then what happens when the kids leave the house? Right? The ego dies, the identity dies, and people enter into this like, well, who am I now? But if there's this underlying knowing of who we are, then all of this just becomes surface area experience that we can choose to let go of at any time. Right? Like if we identify ourselves a certain way for years, well, we can just change. Right? But the latent impressions get us stuck in a groove where in our minds we perceive that we can't change. It's just who we are. Right? So when we meditate, when we practice yoga, when we are moving into an experience of viveka, we're able to see more clearly who we are and who we are not. Right? And if we know that we are not all of these things, then we have the space to become a new person every day. We have that power and that ability. Right? But we get stuck because we're scared of what's on the other side. And from there, we're back to really the first klesha and what's known to stem. This klesha produces all of the other kleshas, which is ignorance of self, avidya. We get stuck in cycles because we don't know who we are. Because we're putting on roles, we're attaching to things, we're avoiding things, we're scared of what's on the other side, and it's causing confusion. Right? So the idea that we do not know ourselves completely, avidya, is the major obstacle, and where all these other kleshas and obstacles form, is because we don't know ourselves. So how do we get to know ourselves? Well, continuous engaged practice, letting go of what we are not. In yoga, we see this as neti neti, which is I'm not this and I'm not that. And viveka, that helps us to see, again, more clearly. But if we are in the ignorance of self, then again, we're feeding the pain body, we're feeding the samskara, and it only grows and grows and grows and gets larger. And so there's never healing really going on if we're constantly stuck in the cycle of samskara with our kleshas, which are the 5 obstacles to happiness. So if we're able to produce a practice where we can perceive, sense, and feel, from there, we can notice, okay, after that feeling, am I going to jump to attachment or avoidance? Or am I going to do my practice, let go, see more clearly, and then break the cycle? So here, right between emotion, feeling, and attachment and avoidance is an opportunity. And that opportunity exists in your daily practice. And that's why yoga is so powerful, is when we turn that awareness inwards upon ourselves, we get to discover what's working, what's not working, who we are. We can continue. This is a beautiful question that always gets asked when following the path of jnana yoga, which is that a pretty hard path to follow, because it's constantly asking the question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And through this neti, I'm not this, I'm not that, eventually we come to who we are, which is pure consciousness, Purusha, pure spirit. So if we just even have that knowledge and we move into situations where we see ourselves separate, then we can remember who we are, which is pure spirit, and find ways to merge back into that understanding of oneness. So this is how this that you talked about yesterday really bleeds into the kleshas and the obstacles of happiness, and how this really supports breaking patterns and the wheel of samskara. So we observe the obstacles of happiness, the essential concepts to yoga, and then we start the 8-limb process in book 2, which is sadhana pada, our spiritual practice. And from our spiritual practice, we see there's 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. And from our pranayama conversation, we know that yama is referring to regulation or restraint, right? So this should be a pretty much a review. And we have the yamas as external observances, while the niyamas are internal observances, right? What do we do outside of ourselves to help support our path and our healing? And what do we do with ourselves to help stimulate growth and nourishment of this healing process? So there's traditional ways of understanding the yamas in Niyamas, and there's also more softer and therapeutic ways of seeing the yamas and niyamas play out. So what I want to do as a review is talk about the traditional terminology of the words 5 yamas, 5 niyamas. And then I want to introduce a more therapeutic, or even some would say a feminine approach to the yama niyama understanding that calls for rather than restraint or regulation or isolation, right? We're seeing how it actually, with a gentle and compassionate approach, we can solve the same issues internally and externally. So the 5 yamas are ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and aparigraha. Aparigraha is aparigraha. Aparigraha. So yamas, external disciplines and reflection of our true nature. So ahimsa is book 2, Sutra 35. And it's talking about non-violence. Satya is book 2, Sutra 36. And it refers to truthfulness. What is true? So kind of checking in on authenticity. It's like, what is true for you versus what is universally true. The third one is asteya. This is known to be non-stealing. Brahmacharya, this moving in order, is about a wise use of our energy. A wise use of our energy. And aparigraha is non-hoarding or non-possessiveness, non-greed. So non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing wise use of energy or moderation, and non-hoarding. Okay, these are things that we can practice to access or understand more of our true nature. While the Niyamas, Saucha, Santosha, Tapa, Svadhyaya, and Ishvara Pranidhana. These are 5 internal observances that we can take. And it's basically talking about an evolution towards harmony, both internally and externally. And when we draw that awareness inwards on ourselves, if we harmonize on the inside, that will be reflected on the outside. Because we are just a microcosm of the greater macrocosm. Saucha is Book 2, Sutra 40, and it's referring to purity, while Santosha is about contentment, peace. Tapas is generally referred to as discipline, right, or to burn. Svadhyaya is around self-study, whether that's mantra or scriptures, or like we were talking about before, that in inner inquiry of questioning, who am I? And then Ishvara Pranidhana is the surrender to the divine, surrender to whatever your God is, right? And sometimes we don't like to use that terminology, but the key here is the surrender piece, the devotion to something greater that is outside of us, that's running its course, right? So from there, when we surrender, there has to be that underlying foundational trust that exists, to know that whatever happens, whatever the way it all falls into place, is for the highest good of all. From Yamas, Niyamas, we then go into the 3rd limb of asana, the 4th limb of pranayama, 5th limb of pratyahara, 6th limb dharana, concentration, 7th limb dhyana, meditation, 8th limb samadhi, enlightenment, right? And the way we see Ashtanga yoga here, which Ashta is 8 and Anga is limbs. So these are the 8 limbs, right? These are the first 2, the Yamas and Niyamas. But we see this in a linear path, right? So you do the Yamas, you do the Niyamas, you do your asana, your pranayama, right? And then it builds, and eventually you reach enlightenment. This is the royal path. This is the Raja Yoga. Okay? But can you, and I have a great teacher that has kind of shined light on, just like we're talking about, that everything in nature, not only this is cyclical, right? We practice, we let go, we discern, practice again, let go, discern. Right? How we cycle through our samskara, our pain body. Even in our Trinity or our Trimurti, we have Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, we have creation, preservance, and then destruction. Things are moving in cycles. They're not necessarily linear, like time and space, right? So if we bring it back to like that merging into oneness, time and space just make things separate and different, right? So if we do our asana, our pranayama, and our meditation, if we have a continuous engaged practice, rather than intentionally practicing yamas and niyamas first, if we do our practice, yamas and niyamas unfold for us. So if we are continuously engaged in our practice, well, we naturally become a nicer person, right? We naturally access our truth. Right? We don't want to steal, right? Because we have that reflective piece through our practice where we're understanding and seeing things more clearly, right? And so we naturally start to find relationships and be in right relationships, right? We understand what a wise use of energy looks like, right? Because we're shining light and we're increasing our awareness. And that's what the practice does. So it can kind of go either way. We can be like, but it takes a little bit more effort, right, to practice this rather than just to do our practice and watch the yamas and niyamas unfold. So this whole system together is quite a large part of the Yoga Sutras. And remember too, like we're only in book 2. There's 3 and 4 as well. And book 3 is what are the powers that we attain that arise from doing our practice. And those are what the siddhis are. While book 4 just describes what freedom is like, what pure liberation is. So this is a more traditional way of understanding yamas and niyamas. It tends to be from a male perspective. And so if we think about maybe the differences between male, female, or dynamic, passive, however you want to describe that, those different energies, this is all about like, no, right? Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, do this, do this, do this. But actually, if we change our lens and we change the language, then the yamas and niyamas, we can really find a nice therapeutic understanding that is helping us to understand what to do, right? How to act, how to be. So we'll go into that now. How to relate to the outside world, but also what to refrain from when relating to the self. And it's thought of as restraint or negative, right? Whereas yoga therapy is about empowerment and it's about the positive, right? So we're going to see if we can shift some of this language to understand it in a more therapeutic approach. So yamas is really about the chance of healing an injury or medical condition, but it has an excellent attitude to take into daily life as well. So anything that is applied on the mat with our physical body and with our practice can also be seen off the mat and into the world. So what we do in this little rectangular space can be applied to how we live our life. So yoga is not a thing that we do, but a lifestyle in which we are doing all things, right? I have a teacher that says the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So ahimsa. If we look at ahimsa as nonviolence, then what it's really saying is gentleness. Let's seek gentleness with ourselves and others. Compassion. So when we think of gentleness, when we're on our mats, what does that mean? Well, that means we can feel into our bodies instead of force our bodies to do things it doesn't want to do, to stretch in ways that it doesn't want to stretch, to avoid kind of that comparing yourself to somebody else's practice. It's like it's not about that, right? It's about where are we at in our practice today. So no pain or discomfort in the body or mind. So gentleness with ourselves and others, and particularly around pain, right? Or discomfort. So we accept where we are, and we take that nonviolence that we want to see outside of ourselves and in the world, and we bring it back in to our own bodies. Right? Accepting, liking the journey, and not being attached to the destination. Right? And in that way, it's preventative healthcare. When we are constantly in tune with what our body needs, not what it wants, then we are maintaining a healthy mind-body awareness. And so we probably won't tend to fall into injury. We're less likely to do that. Satya, rather than truth, it becomes about balance. So not just balance in the mind, but think about on the mat, balance between stretch and strengthen, right? This concept of sthira sukham as well. So mobility, flexibility, and strength is going to be the key to a well-balanced experience. So then upon our reflection, we get to think. Upon our reflection in our asana, we get to think, am I overstretching? Am I hypermobile? Or do I have the strength to back me up? Right? Because we know that balance is the key. In a lot of ancient texts of yoga, when you dive into the core of them, they're all talking about balance. Right? So balance, mobility, flexibility, and strength. Asteya, instead of non-stealing, we find this concept of aini, a balance between giving and receiving. So are we someone who takes a lot? Or are we someone who gives too much? At some point, we need to come back into that balance of giving and receiving. So that's a good place to reflect as well, is what sideline are we on? And not only a balance between giving and serving, but when we give, are we attached to being served? Are we attached to, oh, I'll do this if you do this? Do we have expectations? And how helpful might it be to our body and our mind even to just do it because we want to do it? But also notice when you're overextending yourself versus when you really need to rest. And why do we overgive? Is there a piece of us inside missing that we're trying to fill through serving others? So number 4 is brahmacharya. We talked about a wise use of energy. And when you adopt a wise use of energy or have that balance in your body, the result of that is nourishment. So we have nourishment through wise use of energy. And when we have nourishment, we're promoting circulation of energy and information cycling, anatomically and physiologically in our yoga practice. And so this is about right relationship. Not only with others, but with yourself as well, which should always be your primary focus. Because whatever we do here inside is reflected outside in how we see and treat others. So in right relationship, we're thinking about, connected, supported, loving relationships. So even when you think about the relationships in your life, is it loving and supportive and helping you to grow and nourish your spirit? And if it's not, why do we continue to stay in relationships that are not serving, that are dimming our light? And then lastly, we have a parigraha, which is non-hoarding. And instead of this, grasping or holding onto something, instead we can look at it as cultivating freedom. And instead of not doing something, just the feeling of freedom being like, you can do anything, right? So I don't need to attach onto one thing because there's unlimited things around me. And so it's this is what I mean by like deciding to change the way we think about things, even the way the sutras are translated, right? And Nishala Joy Devi does a really good job of this. She's a woman who translated the Yoga Sutras and has quite a different take that is more aligned with the therapeutic, way of seeing the world. So freedom, what isn't free in our body? Well, in our joints, we get stuck. So in a practice, we might want to mobilize or work on freeing the space that's inside of us because it gets tight. It might be, dance, where we don't have a structured or disciplined movement. We have just free flow that we can tap into. And also our thoughts. So not getting stuck in a certain particular way of thinking or being. And we have openness to hear other people's perspectives and even to adapt to other people's perspectives. Let our mind be malleable, right? So that we don't end up in that same groove, right? In the mud where we're getting stuck. So we can create a wider lens and see what's going on in our peripheries, not just in our very narrow focus or way of looking at the world. So with the Niyamas, we have the potential for the body to heal itself by removing blockages of energy flow, improving circulation, encouraging a loving, trusting, and safe environment, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us to, feel at home in ourselves, to help us be calm, relaxed. And when we are in our PNS, or at least, moving in that direction, all of the systems of the body really like that. So we start to see more positive functioning of all of the systems working together. So we'll look at the 5 niyamas now, and we have saucha, or what's usually been defined as purity or cleanliness. And we see that there are 5 main obstacles or blockages of circulation of energy. 5 main blockages or circulation of energy that block us from being pure, essentially. And that is over tension, I'll just write over once. Over tension, over stretching, right? Someone who might be hypermobile or have bad posture. Over breathing, so if someone moves into an anxious state or hyperventilates. Overthinking, and overeating. Overtension, overstretching, overbreathing, overthinking, and overeating. Blocks us from being totally free and open. Santosha, referring to contentment. And the idea here is that happiness is a choice. Now, I know this phrasing can be controversial when we see so much pain, struggle, and darkness in the world, but it's referring to the way that we can shift our belief systems and our ways of being in the world. And maybe it actually starts with the psychology of the mind to get ourselves out of, physical discomfort or struggle that we see in the world with so much suffering. So there's subtle versions of this, and then there's also, the major suffering that's happening in the world. So it's also saying don't push your practice or others. So from a therapeutic perspective, we're avoiding over-treating people. Hey, this is how you become happy. Do this, this, and this. The empowering process therapeutically is about people discovering that they have the ability to shift the way that they're thinking, right? So avoiding like lecture mentality around, oh, well, if you want to be happy, just do this. It's like meeting people where they are and seeing, hey, have you ever thought about it this way? What would it look like if you adopted this way of thinking or believing? And so it's also about acceptance of the outcome. If people aren't switched on to happiness right after you work with them, we can understand that it's a practice, could last a lifetime. Right? Your nervous system relaxes more when you're at a state of acceptance. So if you're always trying to be happy, if you're always trying to find peace and contentment, then that's going to be a struggle for you, because you're always going to try and reach a goal that doesn't exist for you in the moment. So therapeutically, if we can choose the idea of acceptance of where we are at in every moment and really honor ourselves in that space, then there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. And then the healing is done. Right? And the nervous system likes it when we can just be with what is. Tapas. So we see traditionally here it's referring to discipline, right? Or to burn, literally. And instead, when something is disciplined or structure or burn, we think of fire, right? The tapas is like, what is motivating us? What is moving us in the direction where we want it to go? And usually our passions are a big part of that. Right? Our passions catapult us forward. Right? We move in the direction of what we love. So we can channel our fire, our discipline, towards passions, our love. BKS Iyengar says, do your passionate best. So we saw in the 4 agreements that number 4 was always do your best. And BKS clarifies and says, do your passionate best. So without being aggressive, we bring it back to here, the ahimsa, where we're really calling in gentleness. So noticing when the fire does start to burn and we want to channel that in unproductive ways, usually through aggression or anger or frustration. It's like that is the moment where we bring in compassion and gentleness. And our practice helps us to notice when we are in that fiery, aggressive state so that we can choose a different pathway. Rather than react, we respond. Self-inquiry or self-study for Svadhyaya is basically about an inner quest for knowledge and understanding. And that's really beautiful. Because it helps us to understand that it's never over. And our internal quest for ourselves should precede any treatment that we give for other people. That thirst to know thyself precedes any treatment to someone else. And that happens through the exploration of our body in our practice. Diving down into each subtle sensation, breath. We get to explore, we get to become curious, we get to play in our laboratory, and we are the scientist. So that inner quest should be the utmost important aspect. Because our own direct experience will help us understand and help others. Right? And then finally, Ishvara Pranidhana, traditionally known as surrender to divine. And in this case, therapeutically, we see it as genuinely and authentically engaged in the process of helping others. Genuinely and authentically engaged in the process of helping others. Almost like the way a loving parent treats their child, right? Engaged in that person's health and well-being. Not because they're getting paid for it, not because they have to do it because it's their job, but because they're genuinely interested. That are constantly evolving and changing. And that's why the sutras are really timeless. Because wherever you are in your life, you can always come back to these concepts and think, where am I? Am I in right relationship? Am I in moderation? Where am I holding, onto things? Where am I not being truthful? Where am I hiding? So the therapeutic approach, really as teachers, is to hold the space and step out of the way, and empowering people to discover what they need to discover in their own bodies through their practice. Right? So it's not just guiding someone on a yoga mat for 90 minutes, but it's really planting those seeds of reflection and inner inquiry so that we can come back home to ourselves. Right? And only then can we make shifts and changes once we bring the light of awareness into those darker, harder, shadowy places. A good transition, actually, because, when we're talking about yoga therapy, it's with this understanding, of how we can look at ourselves. This becomes a framework for healing. And there are other frameworks for healing as well. So we have Yamas, Niyamas, we have the Yoga Sutras, that path to freedom and liberation. We have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you guys remember that, which is about, physiological safety, love and belonging, self-esteem, and from there, self-actualization. So you have that pyramid, right? And at the root of that pyramid is the root and sacral chakra. It's also the lower world, right? And it's our primary needs. It's like if we don't have our primary needs, we cannot ascend. It's the same concept of root down to rise up, right? We need our roots. We need our safety ground in order to expand. So we have that, and then safety, that would be Manipura chakra. That would be right here in the solar plexus, also associated to the lower world and also relating to primary needs. Love and belonging, heart and throat. Heart and throat, middle world. Self-esteem, Manipura, middle world. Right? And then from self-esteem, when we have that confidence, when we have that inner knowing, and we can really love and accept ourselves and know who we are, then we become self-actualized, self-realized. Third eye and crown. Another framework, and in the second module, you'll be going more into detail around these things, but another framework could be the koshas. We have 5 different koshas. We have Annamaya kosha, which is the food body. The key word here is about stability. So we're now seeing a system of going from the outside in. So our surface layer of physicality, Annamaya kosha, food body or food sheath, relating to structure, form, stability. Then we have pranayama or pranamaya kosha, which is the pranic body. That's our life force energy. Our vitality is the key word there. Manomaya kosha is the mental body. What is the mind doing? What are the emotions doing? And how is that bringing clarity into our life? Yep. Manomaya kosha, which is about the mental body and how that brings clarity into our lives. Vijamaya kosha is the astral body, and that's about wisdom, right? Something that we can't necessarily touch, but we know that it's true and it's there. And finally, we have Anandamaya kosha, Ananda meaning bliss. We have our bliss body, and that's our pure essence. That's pure love, pure joy. And so it moves from the outside in, so we can use this as a framework to understand where we're at. Let's look at physical, right? Let's look at breath. Let's look at mental. Let's look at emotional. Let's look at astral and look at the bliss bodies, because all of them, going from gross to more subtle, are equally as important to understand and to give attention to, which is why the yoga becomes so much more than the physical practice. It's why we introduce themes, and it's why we're trying to bring a mental focus and an understanding. Right? Butterflies. We talked about the pranavayus briefly yesterday as well. And these are the 5 winds. So another framework for understanding therapeutics might be to go through how people's directions of energy are flowing inside of themselves. So we know there's upward direction, downward direction, lateral direction, uplifting, self-organizing, uplifting energy, and also that central piece for assimilation and integration. So what's missing from somewhere, from someone's experience or from your own experience? It's like a check-in point, right? Moving from gross to subtle. So these are some frameworks that we can use. Again, Yamas, Niyamas as a framework, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the koshas, the layers of the body, and also the winds that are governing the body. And all for just deepening our own awareness and understanding of ourself. And when we explore those levels and aspects of that awareness in ourself, then for sure we're going to be able to help others with a little bit more ease, a little bit more clarity. So we have quite a few anchors for therapeutic understanding and even trauma sensitive awareness. And the reality is that we all have trauma. So we all should be trauma sensitive in all of our classes. And part of that is just being sensitive, being compassionate, and being understanding to, people's pain. So some things to think about are BRFWA, which stands for breathe, relax, feel, watch, and allow. So even just thinking about languaging that you're using in your classes, breathe, relax, feel, watch, and allow. Focus on the breath, focus on sensations, skillful assisting, knowing what type of assist somebody needs in any given moment, asking permission for assist, using the energetic locks of the bandhas, grounding, helping people to feel rooted, body scanning, helping them to, move through their own awareness from different parts of their body in order to learn something and gain information. Permission to modify. So having multi-level classes, making sure people know, hey, if you can't do this, try this. Right? Building from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. Embodiment, reestablishing the connection. Some people kind of disassociate from their experience and from their bodies. Calming the nervous system. For example, if, a certain posture is making you breathe a little bit more tighter and more constricted, knowing when to back off or suggest that someone leans back. Investigating attitude, right? Do you have an investigative, curious, playful attitude to where you are? Like playing with the changing nature of somebody's experience, right? And in your own body, like, oh, I feel this right now, and that's weird because I feel something else 15 seconds later. Emotions are always shifting and changing in different levels. They say, I think 30 seconds we move through emotions every 30 seconds. Another way to not attach onto any particular emotion because it's going to pass and fade. Exploring the mental activity, of course, what is coming into the mind? What are you attaching onto? What are you able to release with ease? Are they past thoughts? Are they future thoughts? Are they experience based? It's like this is, again, we are the scientists and the body and the mind are the laboratory. Energy levels. Are we overactive? Are we underactive? How are we, in balance with ourselves? And establish your own baseline. Establish your own baseline of normal. What's normal to you, right? That's going to be different than my normal and your normal. But we establish our own comfort of what is normal. We also establish a connection to the present moment. So we're staying here and now, and our mental awareness isn't distracting. There is precise and simple cueing that we can offer as well. Invitation of language, right? Maybe, perhaps, you want to do this rather than a more commanding present, which is more kind of along the lines of maybe a traditional way of seeing things or acting. So from the inside out, expansion versus contraction. So understanding when are the moments to open up and when are the moments to fold in our awareness upon ourselves. Sound could support and strip away any patterning and thoughts of the mind. So maybe mantra, thinking about how that makes you feel when that's being played and supported. Pranayama, shift from gross, subtle to cosmic. That's also like lower, middle, and upper world awareness of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So encouraging slow, regular breath through our pranayamas. So bandha is increasing stability and connection to our center, right? Learning to cultivate, build, and also direct our energy flow. Transitions, how are we moving from one posture to the other? Because how we do that, if we're graceful in it, maybe that also mirrors how we are in transition in our lives. If it's choppy and uncomfortable and, misaligned, rigid, could that be a mirror reflecting back at you on how you're able to digest and assimilate the ending of one thing and the beginning of another thing? So that process of journey, right? Bringing that awareness in. Yeah, contemplative environment, right? Like being in nature, not with four walls around you necessarily, can really support the health and well-being of your or somebody else's body. And, really important, non-prescriptive. So we're not telling people what they need to do in order to heal themselves. Again, this is the empowering approach of discovering, inviting people to think about something they may not have thought about before, to get into a shape that they may not have done before, and to just see how it feels. So verify through your own experience as well. And really paying attention to, the nervous system. Because if we are in disharmony from the nervous system, all other systems are going to be affected as a result. So notice if we're in fight and flight or if we're in rest and digest. Yeah, we're basically, trying to build trust and safety. And again, the work is an inward journey, right? So only when we do our work inside is when we start to see it outside reflected, in our life experience. So looking at these different kind of frameworks, the kleshas, the cycles of samskara, the way that we can break free from those cycles by doing our practice, letting go, and being able to see more clearly from discernment. Having, the traditional form of yama niyama, but also thinking about it in a more therapeutic approach, and then using this concept of therapeutic understanding to really help you not only in your own practice, but also, with your students. So hopefully that's helpful.